The innocent shouldn't have to become strong to not be preyed on.
You're an absolute gem. Thank you for clicking on my Suspect series. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today is about Leticia Hernandez. It's always horrible when a life is taken too soon, especially when that person hasn't even made it to middle school. What's even sadder is when nobody knows who to blame. By the way, I post so much content like this and I would love your support by subscribing or thumbsing up. Now let's get back to this story. So Leticia, or Tita as her friends and family called her, was born on December 14th of 1982. She was born to Rodolfo Martinez and her mother of the same name, Leticia Hernandez. She was the middle child of what would eventually become 7 children, all ranging from between 18 months to 17 years old when Leticia was 7. Her oldest sister was Mariah, who was 17, then Victor, who was 9, then Daniel, who was 5, George, who was 3, Miguel, who was 18 months, and Michael, who was in her mother's belly. Her father was a farm worker in Sacramento, California, and her mother stayed home to watch the many kids. They lived on the 1300 block of Bush Street in Oceanside, California, which was just a little ways away from San Diego. Their grandmother, Victoria Gonzalez, also lived with them in their apartment. But Leticia, she was a very outgoing and friendly girl who could basically make anyone laugh. I mean, she wanted to be a model when she grew up, but she was also very kind of timid. She really had a mothering soul to her from when she was young, and that was probably because of the many siblings that she had. She really seemed to like to help out as well as take care of herself. That year for school pictures, she had actually braided her own hair and was very proud of it, and the pictures turned out so beautifully. And at school, the teachers said that she was amazing. She was a lovely second grader who cared about not only her studies but the teachers, the other classmates, helping them out. She was just an all-around amazing young woman. The whole family were all Mormons who attended the LDS church and had a very strong faith. It was December of 1989 and the Hernandez family had already set out their Christmas decorations. They were super excited for the holiday. Gifts were already wrapped and kind of laid out around the tree, and all of the kids could not wait for Christmas morning. It was December 16th, so it was 2 days after Leticia's birthday. She had just turned 7 and it was a Saturday home from school. So Leticia wanted to go out and play with some of the neighborhood kids who also lived in the apartments outside of their complex. She was the only sibling of hers to go play that day. She went and played with everybody. Her mother stood and watched her for a little bit before deciding to go ahead and take a quick trip to the laundry room. She was only gone for about 10 minutes when she came back and noticed that all of the kids were gone. She didn't panic too much, thinking Leticia probably just went with them to go play somewhere else and she'd be home soon. Like I said, she was a great kid, so her mother didn't worry about her too often. She watched out the window for her, and when it was about 9 p.m. that night, the kids came back. Leticia's mother, Leticia, was looking out the window searching for her when she realized that all of the other kids had come back except for Leticia. Her mother asked the children where she was, and nobody knew. So immediately her mother called the police and the search for the 7-year-old began. She was 4 foot tall, 60 pounds, a Hispanic female with brown hair and brown eyes, and she was also missing her upper 2 front teeth. They searched and they were not coming up with anything. There was nearly 200 people out on foot searching for Leticia. Then the police got a tip saying that a man in a 2-tone blue Cadillac was driving around near the Hernandez apartment complex that was handing out $50 bills for anyone who would get in the car with him. It was on 6th and Hill Street, and that was really close to where Leticia had been playing, so they really thought that this tip could help. But that tip was pushed to the side a few days later when a witness called in saying that he had seen a girl that looked just like Leticia at Buckman Spring Rest Stop on Interstate 8, 80 miles from the apartment complex. He said that he had seen her about 6 hours after her disappearance, but he didn't see that Leticia was missing until a few days later when he saw it on TV, and he called immediately. A group was forming at this time called the San Diegans, which was basically a group of celebrities of the Angels from the baseball team, everyone possible that could get involved in the search for her, and they were doing their best to get her face, her name, her image out there. 3 days after her abduction, another tip was called in saying that they had seen her at the Mount Laguna campgrounds. She was with a man and a woman who were both white, and the witness that had called in before had actually seen her with a white male. Then nearly a week after, somebody called in saying that they had seen her at a restaurant in Octillo with the same white man. This man was thought to be in his mid-30s, from 5'8" to 6 foot, from 200 to 250 pounds. He also had shoulder-length blonde hair that was thinning at the top, and on one of his hands he had a cross that was just outlined with words in the middle. The woman that was seen was thought to be about 30 years old, 5'10", 130 pounds, and she had the same shoulder-length hair that was about bleach blonde, but it was very dirty. She also had light color eyes. But there was another woman whose description also kept coming up, and it was thought that possibly there was 2 women involved. She was white with a very deep tan. She looked to be about 40 to 50s, 160 pounds, and had dark brown hair with gray streaks in it. The vehicle used in the abduction was thought to be a mid-1970 Buick Regal or Skylark, and had tan leather with a vinyl interior. The vehicle's license plate was thought to contain KR966 or CR966. But another vehicle that was thought to be involved was a 1975 or older chocolate brown Dodge van, which had bubble windows at the rear and was hauling a black type U-Haul. They seemed to be moving eastward on Interstate 8 and 10 and were spotted at many highway rest stops and gas stations along the way, but were still not caught. On New Year's Eve, a man in Tijuana called a news station saying that he was Roberto Ramirez and that he had Leticia Hernandez. He wanted the parents' numbers. He wanted Leticia's parents' numbers to call them, but the news station obviously either didn't have it or couldn't give it to him, so he hung up and called again. When he called again the next time, the news station actually gave him the number to the police, and then he hung up. Then it was found out that Roberto Ramirez is apparently something that is used as a Jane Doe name or a John Doe in Tijuana. So basically it's like a name that people use when they don't want to use a real name, or it could also be a name that they use on unidentified bodies. But this tip pretty much was cleared of being anything legitimate. January, sightings had come in from Colorado, Texas, Alabama, and finally Florida, and that is where the most tips began coming in, especially January and February. On January 2nd, she was seen in Panama City, January 5th in Brantford, January 1st through 10th in Chattahoochee, and March 11th through 23rd in Quincy, March 26th in Greensboro, March 31st in Mariana and Cottondale, April 30th on the Santa Fe River, and May 6th in Waldo. Her story was put on Unsolved Mysteries, which made these sightings even more frequent, and they kept continuing to get more calls in saying that they had seen Leticia. In May 22nd of 1990, she was seen in High Springs, Florida, but after that, no other sightings were ever made. A psychic named John Monty was hired by a New York newspaper to actually investigate the case of Leticia. He had actually helped the police find a young boy who had been abducted in California. He led the police to exactly where the suspect was, and he was reunited with his family, but this psychic couldn't see anything about Leticia, unfortunately. 7 months had passed and nobody had found her. Her family seemed to almost freeze in time. It was May by now, and they still had their Christmas tree up from the year before that still had the same ornaments on it and pictures all over the tree of Leticia, and the school picture of her with her braided hair. That was also the same picture that was used in the search for her. The presents under the tree still sat there, still wrapped and waiting to be opened, but her mom refused to let anybody open their presents until Leticia was home. There was a green bow placed on a scooter that was for Leticia that Christmas, and the younger children kept asking their mom, when can we open our Christmas presents? But her mom just could not bring herself to do it. It It was almost like she would be giving up on Leticia if she did. Law enforcement agencies from all over were putting their efforts together to try to find this girl because she was seeming to move everywhere. There was even a benefit put on at U.S. Grant Hotel and Broadway to raise a reward fund for her so they could give out a reward for anybody who had information. Leticia's uncle, Javier, who became the family spokesperson basically and who lived with them for a while Leticia was there, he talked for the family because it was too hard for anybody else, and he ended up making a statement saying, "I know we are going to find her. The neighbors come to the house and we pray a lot. Churches also call and say they are praying for Leticia." Her photo was sent to more than 80 million homes across the country and placed on grocery bags in Florida. In San Diego, a plastic cup manufacturer actually put her picture on the cups that were going to be sold at concession stands. And 12 radio stations in Florida were playing a song that had been written for Leticia called "Leticia, We Love You." This song had been composed by an officer actually working the case, Chris McDonough. He had been working the case from the very beginning, and he thought that possibly if Leticia could hear this song, it would give her a little bit of hope, as well as spread the news to anybody who didn't know about her abduction. He also sold the song in cassette form for $5 each and ended up raising $7,500 to go into her reward fund that ended up being up to $10,000. When her brother Victor turned 10, all he wanted for his birthday was his sister to come home. He said, "I hope she's all wrapped up and I hope she has a bow on her." Her classmates at school actually never wanted her seat to be empty, so they would rotate every day, so there would always be one seat empty in the class, but it would never be hers. And by then, her mother hadn't left the house in months. She was afraid they were going to bring Leticia home, or she was going to come home when her mother was out. So she had not left. She said she had been scolding and getting onto the other kids more, and she'd been dreaming out about Leticia, and she just was finding it hard to focus on anything but finding her daughter. She said, "Sometimes people yell out when they cry because it helps them feel better, but I cry silently until I feel I am going to drown." But unfortunately, on March 9th of the next year, in 1991, a skull was found off of Highway S16, 23 miles from their home, by a care worker who was working on a property nearby. It was an isolated area where people who were being smuggled in from Mexico went, where sex workers were often found dead on the side of the road, and it was just a very known place to dump bodies. Dental records confirmed that it was Leticia Hernandez, and a medical examiner at first said she could have either died, 3 months to a year after she had been abducted, but analysts on her skull found that she had died 3 months after her abduction. The same red shorts she was wearing when she was abducted were also found near that area, and so the police began to believe that the people who had seen her all over the country were very mistaken. So the investigation into the possible murder began, but her cause of death was really either never found or never released to the public. Upon receiving the news, her family was obviously devastated, and her mother just stared at the TV while rocking back and forth, saying "very sad" over and over again in Spanish. The police began looking into a man who they had started looking into 3 years prior when she had first gone missing. He was a child molester who lived about a block away from the Hernandez family. He was a landscaper with a wife and 3 kids. He claimed he was out of town the day of the abduction, but witnesses came forward saying that he had not been. DNA from the crime scene was tested against him but was inconclusive, and he was investigated by a federal grand jury, but they didn't find anything, and he was never arrested, but he was still considered a possible suspect. The couple that was originally thought to have abducted her and had been seen with her this entire time was now not really even being looked into, because they did believe that she had died a few months after her abduction and possibly kept in the area the whole time. Leticia's case is still unsolved, and the Oceanside Police Department urge you to call with any information at 966-4911. And on September 2nd of 1992, her case was actually closed. People who have researched this case deeply have found a pattern of a dark history of child abductions near San Diego. On 1986, on April 10th, Ricky Ann Blackie, who was a 14-year-old girl living in Chula Vista, was abducted. She was found 24 hours later, strangled on an exit ramp of Interstate 15. 2 years later, 7-year-old Charity Angelique Corrine had gone missing after heading home from her friend's Pacific Beach house. And the next year in June, hikers actually found her skull. A few months after she was found, in December, is when Leticia went missing. And of course, she was found in March of 1991. In July of that year, a 9-year-old girl named Rashida Wilson disappeared from where she was playing outside of her Yale Hotel in San Diego when she disappeared. But she actually has never been found at all. The first girl that I talked about, Ricky Ann Blackie, is the only one of the 4 to have a case that has actually been solved. In 2003, DNA evidence to her crime scene was matched to a man named George Williams, who was convicted of her rape and murder in 2006. And this led police to believe that possibly he could have murdered Leticia too. The same year all of this was happening, in 1991, another girl was murdered named Laura Arroyo, who was a 9-year-old girl. She was abducted in Chula Vista and was killed 9 hours afterwards. Eventually, DNA caught her killer as well, being Manuel Bracamondes, who was a bus driver for her at the time. He was given the death penalty, but police thought, well, could he have been the one to kill Leticia as well? Could it have been him? Or was it George? Or was it someone else entirely? Or was it the neighbor that they looked into when she first went missing? What exactly happened to her and why? This case was so incredibly heartbreaking to research. It was actually a request by one of you guys, and I love when you guys request cases, and I'm so happy to do them, so thank you for the request. Just hearing the stress and the heartache that the family went through, I mean, you know that every family goes through that, but they were so vocal about theirs and so open and vulnerable with telling the public, and it just, oh, my heart goes out to them so very deeply, because even though they have an answer, it was definitely not the answer they deserved to have. Leticia's memorial service was on March 23rd of 1991, and 450 people showed up to mourn her death. And an organization in California was actually created because of this awful tragedy called Kinder Vision by the lead investigator in Leticia's case. It is basically a message to teach children about stranger danger at school. It's a huge thing that should be in effect everywhere, and I think that schools do it pretty well now, but back then it was a very light subject. Nobody really talked about it that much, and nobody really knew about stranger danger that much. So it was a huge thing that this was brought into awareness because of her case, so this is one positive to the awful outcome. But still, nobody knows who did this to little Leticia, and her mother died in 2008 of cancer, not having any answers. So I don't know, if anything, just share this video, share her story, share her picture, and let people see this girl as a beautiful little shining star who deserved a much longer, much better life. So yes, I know that this was a little bit down of a video, but remember the happy parts of Leticia's life. Remember what an amazing little girl she was, and hopefully someday someone will find something from the past, from their older relatives, that they can come forward with, so at least her relatives know what happened. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. By the way, I have a surprise for you guys coming Monday, October 1st, so get ready. Okay, bye.
Stranger danger is true in a world that doesn't think like me and you.